Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for the first day of the Caribbean Youth Dialogue. We have 27, probably less than 27 because of the those who sign in as host who may not really be participants. So I don't know if we want to wait a few more minutes or if we should start in. Hi, Nadia. Nice to see you.
Hi, good evening to you and to everyone else on the call. Great to be here.
Thank you. You're welcome. I don't see Judith. If Judith is online, maybe sign in under a different name, please let me know. So let's wait another 2 minutes and see if we'll have more people join us, and then we'll start. Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you all can hear me well and properly. Thank you very much for joining us for this very important process that we engage in every year in the region just before we move to the ECOSOC Youth Forum. My name is Dominic Morales. I am the regional representative of the Commonwealth Youth Council. And just before we start, I wanted to just set some guidelines. If you are here, please rename yourself with your full name and the organization you represent. If you're not from an organization, which is totally fine, you may put your country name next to your name. You usually find that in the top right-hand corner of your little bubble that you have. So please do that for us as soon as possible so we know how to engage you and how to ensure that we call you what you want to be called. So without further ado, we start our discussions this evening. I will be your MC, but there will of course be fabulous facilitators and panelists that we will be speaking with this evening or this afternoon. So to open us off and have us going, we start, of course, with the ECLAC sub-regional headquarters for the Caribbean. We start with Abdul Kadri, and so we open with him.
Thank you very much, Dominic. Thank you for the introduction and for moderating today's session of the Caribbean Youth Dialogue. And I see my colleague from the UN Women Multi-Country Office for the Caribbean, Nadia Mani Thomas, online as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad to welcome you to this year's Caribbean Youth Dialogues, which, as in previous years, are a prelude to the ECOSOC Youth Forum that takes place at the United Nations headquarters in New York on the 25th to the 27th of April 2023. The ECOSOC Youth Forum provides a platform for youth worldwide to share their thoughts and perspectives on the 2030 agenda and the sustainable development goals ahead of the high-level political forum on sustainable development, the HLPF. The theme for this year's HLPF is accelerating the recovery from coronavirus and the full implementation of the 2030 agenda for sustainable development at all levels. And the forum will feature the review of national progress that has been made in attaining SDG 6, clean water and sanitation, SDG 7, affordable and clean energy, SDG 9, industry, innovation and infrastructure, SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities, and as it is done every year, SDG 17 on partnerships for the goal. The ECOSOC Youth Forum and the Caribbean Youth Dialogues are therefore organized to review these same goals. Over the next 2 days, youth representatives will lead discussions on SDGs 6, 7, 9, and 11. These are not meant to be exhaustive presentation of the issues relating to the SDGs. Rather, they are meant to initiate discussions by Caribbean youth on these issues. And we very much look forward to your contribution to these dialogues. The outcome of the dialogues will be presented at the Children and Youth Forum, taking place at the margins of the meetings of the Forum of the Countries of Latin America and the Caribbean on Sustainable Development, which takes place every year organized by ECLAC. This year it will take place in Santiago, Chile, later this month, precisely on the 24th of April, and at the Caribbean Regional Breakout section of the ECOSOC Youth Forum. And this presentation will be regarded as a Caribbean youth position. Therefore, I encourage you to actively participate so that the outcome will be as comprehensive as we would like it to be. As has been in previous years, this year's youth dialogues are a forum of Caribbean youth by Caribbean youth, the Caribbean Regional Youth Council, CREEC, the Commonwealth Youth Council, CYC, the SDG youth leaders, and the Trinidad Youth Council played a leading role in organizing and promoting this year's event. Their efforts were supported by the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, and the United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women, UN Women, who provided technical and logistical support to youth representatives in making these dialogues another successful event. As we are now in the second half of the 2030 agenda, I encourage you as youth to remain engaged in advancing sustainable development and to be steadfast in making your contributions to the achievement of the SDGs by the year 2030. I wish you very productive dialogues over the next 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abdul, for those words that laid the foundation for why we're here today. And we move swiftly along to our colleague Nadia Manning Thomas she is the Planning and Coordination Specialist of the UN Women Multi-Country Office of the Caribbean. Welcome.
Hi, good evening. Dominique, thank you very much for the introduction. Good evening to Abdullah, my colleague. Good evening, friends, future friends, amongst everyone in the group. I wish I could see more faces, but I understand that sometimes bandwidth issues prevent that, but that doesn't stop the energy that I can feel coming through the airwaves of this Zoom call. And exactly that energy is what we need from these type of platforms. So I'm Nadia Manning-Thomas from UN Women, and I just want to make a few words. I plan to start where I plan to end and end where I plan to start. We'll get to that. So where I plan to end is that it's a call to action. This is a great platform. This is a great opportunity with these Caribbean Youth Dialogues that are in preparation of the ECOSOC Youth Forum to have the voice of the youth, considering the place of the youth, considering the challenges for the youth in the SDG implementation. And we need those voices to be heard, and we need you to have the courage to bring up those challenges, those ideas, the opportunities, the entry points, all of those things to be able to help as we go through this SDG roadmap, which is really helping all of us, but as young people, it will be helping you as you move forward into the world. So that's where I plan to end with the call to action. How do I get there? How does UN Women play a feature in here? Well, UN Women is very, very happy to play a part, being a supporting partner. I am the youth focal point, and I'm very excited to be involved with the youth. I feel like it makes me youthful by being part of this. But importantly, two reasons. One is that of the 1.8 billion young people, so between age 10 to 24 in the world, 600 million of these are adolescent girls and young women. And proportionately, young women face gender-based discrimination and marginalization and violence. And so UN Women, with our mandate, particularly to look at gender equality and women's empowerment, are very concerned with making sure that the voice of these sort of 600 million adolescent girls and young women can feature in all of the work that we do to try and make a more peaceful and developed world. But this is not to say that we only focus on women. It is about gender equality. And although UN Women has SDG 5 on gender equality and empowering all women, perhaps as that thing that our SDG that comes forward the most. In fact, actually, we work across all 17 of the SDGs. So although SDG 5 is not listed as one of the ones for review under this particular dialogue, actually gender equality cuts across all of the SDGs. And it recognizes that all of the actions, so in one area, will affect outcomes in the other area. And that's very, very true for gender. So we also consider very carefully youth and gender equality and have a strategy on that. And we look at how gender cuts across each of these SDGs. So when you look at SDG 6, ensuring universal and equitable access to clean water and hygiene for all, we're really thinking about that access. We're really thinking about the all. And so gender and youth come in very carefully there. SDG 7 as well, ensuring access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. We need to make sure it's that for all. Leaving no one behind is one of the key missions also that the UN is working towards. For SDG 9 and SDG 11, it's the same thing. And I'd just like to give an example that for SDG 11, some work that UN Women has been doing has been looking at a model for resilient, inclusive, secure, and smart cities. So how do we, as we have urban planning, as we plan for growth of our urban spaces, make sure that we have all the voices at the table to plan for that growth and make sure that the resilience that's necessary in the face of vulnerability to climate change is addressed for all sections of society, but also particular vulnerabilities across the gender spectrum that happens in urban spaces. So this is our way of also saying we want to make sure that those voices are at the table, a similar call to action as this particular platform. So, as I said, I'm starting where I plan to end and ending where I plan to start, which is again to say that we are very happy to be supporting this, and we look forward to hearing the voices and make that call to action to really get the voices of the youth to provide us ideas around the challenges, the opportunities, the entry points, the ideas as we together go on this roadmap that is mapped out through the SDGs and the 2030 development agenda. We very much look forward to listening and hearing from you all. Thank you very much for the opportunity to give a few words.
Thank you very much for those words, and of course for telling us a bit about the work UN Women does in the Caribbean. Thank you. Now, as you can see, the sun is setting on my face in very chilly Colombia, and I am mandated to also give a very, very short blurb on as my position of the CYC demands. And I'm happy to leave much of the talking space to our stellar panel and you who will be driving our discussions today. The ECOSOC Youth Forum may seem like a mundane process and an ever-churning pattern of UN processes, but it is by and large a political process, one which we must co-write for ourselves. And I believe at the center of Caribbean civilization is our ability to tell stories, utilizing our creative capital to really change the world. That's really one of our trademarks. And we must treat these dialogues and the EYF on a whole as incubators for such opportunities to translate that storytelling superpower into dynamic innovations that remain centered on those who are not only subjects, but indeed are authors of those stories, positioning and posturing ourselves as experts in our lived experiences and collaborators in the forging of our common future. In this, the Commonwealth Year of Youth, and as we accelerate to this co-created recovery that we imagine for ourselves, let us be sure that we are not only not leaving anyone behind, but beyond that, that we are not putting the cart before the donkey. I am looking forward to learning, sharing, growing from everyone's insights and stories and creative work, and of course, from their constructive criticism over the next 2 weeks. So thank you very much. And with that, before I pass over, I want to remind everyone to please use your name. So your name and your organization, your name and your country. And as you enter, please mute your mic so we know how we are to address you as we move along. And I move swiftly over to our very able facilitator, Mr. Shane John, who is the president of the Trinidad Youth Council, who will be facilitating and moderating our discussion on SDG 6. So, Shane, you're up.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Now, we are here to discuss SDG 6. Now, I was reminded by Thomas Fuller that we never know the worth of water until the well run dry. Now, this evening, my task is very simple. I'm here with 3 lovely young women from the Caribbean, and we are going to discuss SDG 6, which sometimes we take for granted. But under Sustainable Development Goal 6, it's about clean water and sustainability for all and sanitation for all. It is one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals established by the United Nations in 2015, with the official wording being ensuring availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. The goal has 8 targets to be achieved by 2030, and progress is being made, and we are here this afternoon to hear about the progress as well as the solutions and the challenges faced by young people within our region. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce my panelists. And the first person I'm seeing her on camera, so I'll go with her first, which is Janelle Tomlinson, who is a scholar, activist, and a researcher. And she has been within the trenches of climate change and climate action, where she was awarded the Prime Minister Youth Award in Excellence in Environmental Protection in 2019. And she is currently the Caribbean Advisor on Global Green Grants Next Gen Climate Board. We are also joined by Miss Araya Laidlow Ferdinand, who is currently a lecturer in green engineering at the SVG Community College and a climate and disaster risk management specialist. And finally, I bring it back home in Trinidad with Miss Karina Nanan, who is a vibrant and enthusiastic and strong-minded young woman who's passionate about the environment, and she formed the Willow Foundation in 2020, a youth organization in Trinidad and Tobago that is passionate about climate change and climate action. So this evening, I want to hear from my colleagues Sustainable Development Goal 6, talking about sustainability for water. So I will go first to Janelle. And when you hear Sustainable Development Goal 6, sustainable water, what comes to mind, Janelle?
Thank you so much, Shane, for that question, and welcome to the other panelists as well, to the attendees. Happy to be here, as well as happy to be able to present and to speak to this particular issue. So when we think about access, availability to clean water and to sanitation, I want to put a scenario to you here today. I want you to imagine with me a young person living in a rural at-risk community in a single-parent household, already has those kind of existing socioeconomic issues, but then this young person has to deal with an issue of drought in their community. So we recognize now that the issues are no longer social, they're no longer economic anymore, but then we recognize environmental issues coming into play, because then we recognize that how water is prioritized in the household becomes an issue. Overall access to sanitation is an issue. The ability of this child or children to go to school becomes an issue because of this drought. And then we recognize, therefore, that how the water is prioritized in the home in relation to how much is allocated to cooking, to cleaning, to sanitation, therefore becomes a challenge in the household. And I want you to imagine with me that this young person is a young woman who is wheelchair bound and who is experiencing her menstrual cycle. We now recognize the different compounded challenges and issues that affect us where water and sanitation is concerned. But we also recognize within this scenario that those who are already vulnerable, those who are already disadvantaged, those who are already uncomfortable are always the ones who are most impacted, irrespective of which challenge, irrespective of what the situation is. And so in addressing all these different SDGs and assessing issues affecting youth, women, indigenous groups, we have to recognize that the voices of those who are being most impacted need to be considered in the conversations. And so now that we have set that context and laid that sort of foundation as to the importance of having intersectional and interlinked conversations when discussing the SDGs and water in particular, we can say that the primary challenges being faced by youth, whether at-risk youth, whether young women, whether indigenous youth, are under two overarching, I'd like to call them, areas. Within communities, we recognize that there's limited water access and availability primarily in some rural communities, which are further compounded within the context of a changing climate. And even spaces where we do see young people who have access, again, climate change creates that space where, again, access and availability become a challenge that they will have to contend with. And as a result, we recognize that these problems, impact and affect each other, affecting hygiene, sanitation, and overarching activities that individuals have to carry out every day. And so when we shift a little bit from the community and look at young persons within themselves, we then recognize that for those of them who are involved in, say, groups and institutions and organizations that are trying to effect change, we also recognize that there are limited opportunities for the sharing of stories, for amplifying voices to decision makers, and in being able to, have that sort of impact that they'd like to have. Nonetheless, we have seen through collaborations, through partnerships, particularly across CYE and Caribbean, the organization that I'm representing here today, that irrespective of the challenges, irrespective of the issues, there are channels that can be explored. There are partners that are willing to engage youth, that are willing to work alongside young people to be able to effect change. And so I'd just like to touch on a few of those before I conclude my remarks here.
Now, Janelle, before we go, we want to keep the conversation fluent. So let's bring in Araya now. And
okay.
I want to hear from you, Araya. When you hear Sustainable Development Goal 6 and it talks to clean water and sanitation, what comes to mind?
Thank you so much, Shane. Good evening to the panelists and all who are here. It is indeed a pleasure to be able to be here to represent and to present on such an important SDG, especially from my personal context here living in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, especially on the Grenadine island of Bequia, where we have no surface water, no centralized water system, and we have to depend on rainwater on-site harvesting. Now, my colleague Janelle touched on a lot of great components as it relates to the impacts of young people and what are some of the things and challenges that currently exist and will continue to exist in the future if we don't look at that sort of intersectionality and that connectedness between the SDGs. So not to reiterate or go over what she said, but one thing I really want to touch on in terms of keeping the conversation and going is that what are some of the entry points or recommendations that we can look at going forward? Now, one of the things that I find in terms of the literature as it relates to SDG 7 is that they're looking at outcome targets of an integrated water management system. Now, I say that there's a flaw to that, and I propose an integrated watershed management system because this is where we incorporate all the actors and activities within our entire system that can impact and affect the amount and quality of water anyone will receive throughout their daily activities and so forth. So once we are able to integrate or develop programs that take into account actors, including young people, then we'll be able to see them as a part of the solution and not just passive bystanders. One of the other aspects or one of the other entry points, I think, for opportunity for us is, of course, education. And not just this sort of tokenist, tired educational programs where we go into the schools and we do a 15-minute presentation on maybe conserving water. But how can we really integrate young people in providing solutions to the projects that are developed? And that is one of the issues because within the region, we know there are amazing funding and donor organizations who develop projects and programs. However, I don't think they play or they don't give enough attention as to how we can really integrate young people within those countries, within those spaces, especially within rural areas, vulnerable areas, to be a part of the process, right? They don't just have to be spectators to what is going on. Let young people, children, girls, and so forth be a part of creating solutions to the problems, and you will be surprised. For example, within my green engineering cohort for my final year to class, one of the SBA projects is looking at how to create a centralized wastewater management system for tourism development along the coastal south area of St. Vincent. So if young people can come up with ideas like this, just imagine if we continue to give them or create those spaces for them to tell their stories, to share their ideas and compound upon that. Just one more point, because I know we want to really have a dialogue and a conversation before we go, as to how we can create those linkages between our industries, our main industries, tourism and agriculture, where youth are involved in, right? What sort of skill sets that they can develop to be able to incorporate measures in which they are able to conserve the amount of water that they use within their particular day-to-day jobs within these industries. For example, hydroponics. It's a huge component as it relates to agriculture in some of these smaller islands, on-site water harvesting, and also desalination as well. So maybe as we go forward, we'll talk more about this and how young people can continue to get involved in building skill sets and maybe then even building that interest in this particular field.
Thank you very much, Araya. I mean, it's something that we have to look forward to in terms of our discussion. And you touched on hydroponics as well as water, sustainable water projects that we can do. I know we also have the rainwater harvesting within the Caribbean region, and that is something that we have to delve into as to how we can adapt these projects into the system, so to ensure that this discussion can be further implemented within and across the region. So I take us now to Karina, who is from Trinidad and Tobago, my homeland. And I want to hear from you, Karina, what comes to mind when you hear the discussion about SDG 6 as it relates to water and clean water and access to water? Karina?
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I hope that you can hear me. I am coming to you from Trinidad and Tobago, representing the UNFPA. Thank you so much Today we are, basically on the topic of SDG 6, which is clean water, hygiene, sanitation, and all these different things. But particularly for the youth dialogue today, it's about young people and how we can be inclusive, how we can be involved, and how we can, generate that as a togetherness. I want to also give special shout out to the team, to the other members as well from Trinidad and Tobago, Commonwealth, Creek, other special persons on the panel. Thank you for having us. Really and truly, I wanted to also just touch base on what Aria would have mentioned, as well as Shane, on hydroponics. I want to start off on that. So many islands are also now promoting that hydroponics is sort of a way and a new sustainable way on how you can use water mitigation to now generate food through plants and different agriculture forms. You can create it from in really rural communities to urban communities. It can be fitted anywhere. So really and truly, I wanted to also touch on, there's a point from the UN SDG. So we know that this talks about water, clean water, hygiene, sanitation for all. But there's one particular point that states in the UN SDG 6.6 on how by 2030, the UN SDG, one of the SDGs, is to protect and restore water by ensuring that our ecosystems, including our mountains, our forests, our wetland, our rivers, and aquifers and lakes to be fully sustainable. And I think we have so many of us here on this call from all different islands, different parts of the Commonwealth. And I think this is really something we can work together in partnerships, youth organizations, NGOs, whatever you represent, to really help create eco and environmental friendly projects that helps restore things like our ecosystem, because those things help generate us for water. I mean, yes, some of us are on islands, we live surrounded by water. Some of us are not fortunate enough. We have to go on coastal features to really get access to that. But really and truly, it's about us and our generation and how we can help make that change. So many people across the world, including in sub-Saharan Africa and different regions and continents, have to go miles and miles just to access clean water. There are studies that are showing that 1 billion people still don't have access to water, that young women and girls also have to, miss school. We talk about gender equality as well. When you have to go to a standpipe or maybe a water well that's very far from where you live, you are depriving young women and girls from attending schools, from getting an education, because those are typically the men who would be able to do that. They have to go out and work. So women are now responsible for household chores and these sort of things. So something that we may take for granted here in the Caribbean is something that's still so precious in different parts of the world. I also want to take this moment as well to acknowledge some of our state agencies in Trinidad and Tobago that really has been doing a lot to help implement and ensure, according to some statistics that we found earlier, there is about almost 98% of Trinidad and Tobago is able to access clean water. Sometimes we may have little issues because we have, here and there we may have a little water pipeline problem. But 98% of Trinidad is still able to now access basic clean drinking water. I know that we could still do a lot more to improve that, but it's still very, very good. In 2020, those statistics show that this is the highest we've been in 20 years. So that's a really good accommodation for the government of the Republic. We also have a few key stakeholders that really help to really mitigate clean water. We have the Environmental Management Authority, which is EMA. We have the Ministry of Public Utility, which is a part of the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. We have ODPM, and we have, SwimCall. Those are people who help with waste management and, different things. So to ensure that we are making sure our desalination plants are in order, we have a lot of accessible parts for water, and we're trying to ensure that we have that sustainability. But most importantly, it's going to take a lot of us in terms of young people to help push the importance of it, because President Shane would have also stated earlier, you never miss the water until the well runs dry. So let's not wait for something like that to happen. So I really think in my closing remarks today, it is for us to create future partnerships. We really have to do more to preserve the ecosystem that we currently are a part of, that we live in, that we have surrounding. Don't take it for granted, because we don't want it to be that we are not able to access clean water that is a part of our vital part of life. Thank you so much. Back to you and to the panel, Shane.
Thank you very much, Karina. And it's something that we have to look forward to. In all of your opening comments, you spoke to the challenges that young people face. And it's something that is alarming because of the discussions, and we have varying young persons from 12 to 35 years, and you're talking about a cross-section of young people. We're talking about SCA students, CXC students, university students, and the region, given the impact of climate change in recent years, we're talking about droughts, we're talking about flooding, all of which falls under SDG 6. We as young people have a responsibility to play our part. And that is why, representing over 11 million young persons within the region, I want to hear from you. And I will start off with Araya. And let's get down to the details as to their challenges, and we have listed them. What are some of the things that you think young persons can start doing to get involved in the fight of, one, ensuring that there is access to water, those civil society as well as the government play a role in ensuring that? What are some of the things that young people can do within their spaces to ensure that there is proper access to water? And there is also that conversation of conservation of water. And before you go, I'll also invite those who are listening to us attentively on Zoom to share your questions or your comments so that we can ensure that you are included in the conversation. Araya.
Yes, thank you so much, Shane. And I'm happy that you mentioned the conservation. You know, I don't want us to get taken aback or carried away with the technology that might help to increase accessibility, but conservation is key. And for me, what young people can do is basically from what we're doing right here, get involved within the discussions. I know there's a big discussion about the political will of our decision makers, but I think it's so important for young people to take agency and take a seat at the table and make their voices be heard. So one of the first things I think young people definitely can do, if there is no existing organization within their countries that lead towards this, because there are great youth organizations. For example, here in St. Vincent and Grenadines, you have the GCI and so forth, who are heavily involved in climate action. Get involved in groups and create that partnership with other young people to be able to champion specific causes that would affect them, right? In addition to that, the partnership between regional countries is often important. I think sometimes, even though we try to speak on forums like this, I think it's so important for Caribbean young people to come together, to share best practices, to share ideas, and maybe a unified shout, a unified champion for the issues, especially as it pertains to SDG 7, will definitely be heard by our CARICOM leaders. What if we had a sort of campaign or a march in all the countries for one day that's related to SDG? I think that would be impactful. So different activities such as this. Also, I think what is important is for young people to not to shy away from sharing ideas, developing projects, and doing some of the simplest things. So simple campaigns within schools about conserving water, how to wash your hands appropriately and so forth, how to, when you're going to take a shower, you know, we learn these things in primary school, but as we get older and we get into the adolescent age, we throw away all those things. We're taking 15-minute showers. So the things that were reinforced in us at a younger age, I think definitely should be brought back up and re-educated as time goes along. And it's so funny you mentioned conservation. I just want to touch on rainwater harvesting, because that is not a new technology. I think we need to tap into our local and traditional knowledge as it pertains to water usage and conservation. There are already success stories across the region as to how governments go about doing that. And of course, youth play a vital role in that, because Young people make up the majority of the population for a lot of the Caribbean islands. So them learning how to conserve water reinforces that sort of rainwater harvesting system, because remember, your particular on-site system could only hold so much for so long. And with prolonged dry seasons, it means that we would have increased capacity. So therefore, conservation is definitely necessary. So having young people involved in, or letting young people creating partnerships, right? Putting your ideas out there and just going back to the things that we already know. And before we move on, I just want to make one point, because we're speaking about climate action, but we should not forget that young people should often be thought about in the context of disaster risk management, emergencies, right? Young people are often most vulnerable after you have an emergency. For example, here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we have the last eruption, right? And a lot of the young children were succumbed to asthma and all these sorts of different things. So not having access to clean water would definitely compound those sorts of issues. So looking at young people as it relates to not only climate change and water, but at intersection with disasters, not just hydromet, but also our geological disasters and the pandemic as well. Right? Not having access to water means that you're unable to properly protect yourself against COVID-19. And although children were not greatly affected, they were asymptomatic and therefore they were, deemed as carriers. And even though people might think we're past COVID, right, we still have to prepare for the next biological hazard. It will come, right? So when we think about water and the most vulnerable are youth or young people, it's not just within the context of climate change, but also our geological hazards and our biological hazards as well.
Thank you very much, Araya. And I know I was going to ask the other young ladies to touch on the solutions, but I think you did a good job in terms of addressing those things. And one of the things that you spoke about is not shying away from developing your ideas. And we talk about these discussions as young people, and you touched on it very well in terms of the importance of letting your voices be heard and actually being that change that we always say. So I want to go to Janelle now, but I want to shift the discussion a bit. We're talking access to water, but we're also talking the poverty levels within our different regions. And we're talking about the price of water within the region. So I want to hear from you, and then I'll go straight into Karina, because right at home, there is a discussion of raising water rates within our country. But there is a challenge for proper deliverables on water within the Caribbean region. What are your thoughts on the price, and how does that impact young people in terms of those young professionals who have to pay their water rates that sometimes seems to be overweight in terms of the cost and what you actually get when the weeks come?
So thanks for that, Shane. So I can speak to the Jamaican context. When we think about water rates, I'm going to be honest, it's not that expensive, maybe in comparison to other countries. Of our utilities, water remains one of the lowest costs that I would have to say of water, electricity, internet. So when we think about it, the issue, I wouldn't say is with the costing or the rating, but again, accessibility. There are many communities that to this day still do not have piped water. And I know Aria mentioned, communities in Southern Africa and all these other countries that are often depicted as, being those that are most impacted. But even here in Jamaica, we still have communities where young women, children have to go to a standpipe, go to a river to be able to fetch water for the household. And so what I don't think the rate is the issue, it's being able to even access the water to pay for it in the first place is where the challenge arises. And so we recognize again that that is a problem. But just to touch a little bit on what Aria had mentioned, I just want to go back to that a small bit. I know that for many of us, we tend to promote the ideas of campaigns and capacity building. And while I support that, because that's a lot of the work that we do, I think we have to recognize that the differing realities of youth across the region exist. And so if we are going to be able to have youth be engaged and empowered, we have to meet them where they are. And we have to recognize that we have to connect back the SDGs to their bread and butter issues. You cannot go into a community where the youth don't even have water to go to school tomorrow, or the parents don't have water to cook meals, and we're going in there telling them about online campaigns. They may not even have access to the internet either. And so for us, we have to make sure that whatever we are trying to promote, whatever messages we're tailoring to individuals, matches back with their reality. And so we have to make sure we're cognizant of the needs, the challenges, the issues of youth before we start deciding on what's best for them. And so for some communities, it might be helping them to come up with a proposal to be able to get water infrastructure so that they can even truck water into the community that can serve as a communal sort of space. It may be having drums being bought and the community buying them back at a lower cost again to be able to access water. And so I think our approach cannot be one size fits all. It has to be tailored to the context, to the issues, to the challenges, and then creating that type of hybrid approach area. We know that, the campaigns and stuff work for us, but what about the youth who are not interested in a campaign, but want to be able to have a cold drink tomorrow? How do we create opportunities for them as well? And so while I take Shane's question about rates and, being able to pay for the water, they have to have access to it in the first place to even consider allocating funds for that. So I will close there and go to Aria.
Yes, so before we go to Aria, I wanted to bring in Karina. Now, Jenna, you spoke about something very, very important. It's the rate is not the issue, and you said the rate is not the issue, but it's the proper access to the water. So, Karina, let's spin the conversation a bit more in terms of policy and also the role in which the Caribbean diaspora has leaned on foreign nations, the UN, the EU, in terms of access to funding to improve our pipeline systems. What do you think should be done now in terms of improving that dissemination of water at a level of a government? And as a young person, what would you first suggest in terms of improving that access to water and providing for water within the region, having access to the resources, or what should the region ask for in terms of improving its supply of water? Karina?
Okay, so that's quite a question. First, I want to touch base because Shane would have also indicated, for those of you who are neighboring islands to Trinidad and Tobago, we have been, in a bit of a discussion about state utilities, particularly that of electricity and water. We have a very, I would say, moderate rate, I would say, at the current time. Depending on the average household, different. We have a very mixed diaspora in Trinidad and Tobago. We have different persons of different social classes, and different rates may affect different persons, different communities, these sort of things. But it is a conversation. There's a commission. There's a lot of public consultations. Some people are not very happy about it. It's a very big conversation topic. And at this point in time, I think I would not want to comment too further in terms of what government initiatives should be or shouldn't be, because I don't have all the information at hand. But what I can say is that I do hope that what we can do in going forward, we ensure that communities, especially rural communities, because I think Ms. Tomalanson, Janelle, I'm sorry if I butcher your name, Janelle and Aria, I know we both would have talked about basically the same thing. We are both young ladies from different islands, but we are basically facing the same thing. And that is, we want to do these campaigns and we want to do these conversations and we want to get access to young people, but how are we ensuring that people are getting access to clean water and basic water? We can do so much conservation campaigns, but if young children are not going to school, they can't get water, they don't have a water tank in their home, simple little things like this. It may seem like it's nothing for you and I, but there's some parts of the Caribbean where if you don't have a tank that's at a certain height, I'm like literally sitting here and watching it. There's some communities and countries in the Caribbean that you have to build water tanks very high up because you have to get pumps and certain things that you and I may take for granted in certain parts of the Caribbean. And while we may access certain funding, I think that's what you asked, right, Shane? How do we request funding and how do we get proposals and these sort of things? We have to ensure that they are develop and design for certain communities. Because what may work for Shane and I may not work for Janelle and Aria. What may work for Grenada may not work for Guyana. So we have to ensure first that it is curtailed to a country, curtailed to a community, and we have to now do surveys in specific like rural communities. No matter what parts in the Caribbean you are, we need to look at rural communities first and try to get them the highest priority to access of water, clean water, whether it be better plants that we build, better reservoirs. Even if it is government can start to create certain grants for pumps, for tanks, something along those lines. But each island, each country will have to do certain measures first. So certain state agencies will have to go out there, talk to people, be on the ground, see what's happening. But really and truly, we really need to curtail this. And I assume each government has the resources to do surveys and find out this information, but rural communities should be a priority.
Thank you very much, Karina. Very, very pertinent points touching on rural communities, because all of us within the region, there are communities that are literally left behind, and we have to curtail our resources and curtail our actions to ensuring that we connect with everyone, and using the difference between spring water and the difference between wells, as well as the difference between rainwater. That is a discussion that we must engage with. So we want to hear from you at this time. So I'm seeing a comment in the chat from Emmanuel, and she says environmental and social assessments must be conducted, and that is an important and integral point, because it's something that we do not do within the region, and we struggle at certain times. We look at action rather than first doing the study, so that is something that we struggle with. But I'm seeing my colleagues from down the islands, I'm seeing Grenada, I'm seeing Guyana, I'm seeing other nations here. So I'm wondering if anyone has any comments, questions to join in the conversation. I'm inviting you. The floor is now open. Turn on your mic so you can comment, you can raise your hand, so that we can join in this very pertinent discussion. It's a discussion that we, as young people, don't really get into, but it's something that is very important. So I'm seeing Trina from Belize. Trina, the floor is yours.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. You guys can all hear me? Yes? Okay. So, as a consultant, I get to engage with rural, local communities and indigenous communities. I myself am a member of an indigenous community. One of the things that I wanted to touch on very quickly is the fact that as we're all saying, yes, we need to engage these people, or we're making recommendations as to what we need to do as young people. But young people in those communities are often they're hardly consulted. They're hardly engaged. I've been to several different countries in the Caribbean. I've had the opportunity to go to Fancy in St. Vincent, and nobody talked to anybody in Fancy, you know? In Belize, I've had the opportunity to go to different indigenous Mayan and Garfna communities that I typically don't go to on a regular basis, even though I am a member of an indigenous community. And again, the youths are there, they're hungry. It's not that they don't want the information. It's not that they don't want to be engaged, but they don't have the opportunity in a lot of these communities, yeah? So I think it's very important that we're mindful, even when we say what youths can do. I think it should be a wider discussion about what we can do. Not what youths can do, but what can the youths who can do for the youths who can, you know? Even when we're talking and giving suggestions, and we're talking about having forums like this, other youths from my communities and others rural, they wouldn't be able to join a forum such as this, yeah? Over the last 3 years of doing consultancy since COVID has started, everything has moved online. When we moved online, we accessed a lot. We were able to share a lot. I'm able to talk to you guys all right now about different things that I might have experienced or things that I have seen. But we also boxed out a group of people. Yeah. When we think about, oh yeah, we could do things online. This is great. We can have discussions and all of these things. We could talk to so much people at once. And we spend less money to have these types of discussions. We box out a lot of people who would have gotten the money to travel up, the people who would have gotten the exposure, the people who would have been able to go to a conference in a different country and see different things, experience different things, maybe even go through a WASH training, come back and share it with their communities. So some of these things, it's not just about moving forward and reinventing the wheel, but also sitting down and think about the things that we stopped and things that have been happening that might have been working and things that were very influential in the past that we need to bring back, because these conversations are great and there are many people who will be able to listen, but some of the people who need it the most will not be able to even have the internet connectivity to sit down on a platform such as this. Yeah. So that is something I wanted to say first. I wanted to also touch on something that Arya had said. And she was talking about the water that is available in Beckway. I completely understand that as well. I've been to Beckway, I've seen it happening, I see it happening here. One thing that I want to complain about in some of our countries is that they're often trying to come and WASA in some of the countries want to police people about the water that they're collecting and how much water they're collecting. Now, that is not just harsh and, in my opinion, often inhumane, but it is also a problem to people from rural communities, which again, like I said, it's often intersectional. Rural communities have indigenous people, it has local people, who have been doing things for a long period of time in one way. Now, instead of we try to make different recommendations, and when I say we, I'm talking about like our governments and also working with WASA, oftentimes it's the argument comes back to how safe the water is for those in the communities, but there is no training to go and ensure that these people are able to not only utilize the water, but how to safely collect, filter, and utilize that rainwater or that above ground water, that well water, whatever kind of water you can get. The people who cannot even afford the water, like what Janelle had said earlier, she was talking about the rate is not necessarily the issue. I agree, access is. And when you look at just in Belize, for argument's sake, the connection fee, I just had to do this during this week. The connection fee is $85 Belize, which is over 40 US. That is just the connection fee. The security deposit is $50, and that is 25 US. That is just a security deposit. We're not even talking about how much I'm going to pay for my water bill as yet, even if I get the flat rate, even if I'm in the countryside. But I had to find that capital in the very get-go so I could even connect my house, you know? And we're not talking about sewage. I'm just talking about the regular water for the house, yeah? So some of these things are important.
Very much so. And this is why we are having this discussion, because it's an individual topic to each country within the region, and each one of us here have different experiences. And I'm seeing the comments within our chat, and one person said, Ashanti, she said, perhaps underground community organization can be utilized, engage directly with those who are without internet. And I think that is a very, very meaningful contribution. And then Mr. Lurch shared from Guyana, and she said, how can you get a parent to support a child that wants to be a part of the solution within the country or the community, but the parent is not giving you the support? So these are some of the challenges that young persons are facing in terms of engaging in these conversations. And then I see another comment. It is also important for young people to feel as though their voices are being heard. And this is why we are here, because we are the voices that should be heard and are being recorded to go to where it matters most in terms of recording the voices for young people. But it should not only be, for me, it should not only be recording the voices of young people, but actually seeing the action behind the words that are being recorded. And I'm seeing one more hand, I'll take one more. I'm seeing Rashad from CYC, and I'm seeing Rashad from CYC. I think I saw one other hand, but I'll take Rashad and then we'll go to closing statements from the panel. Rashad?
Hi, hello everyone. Just briefly, I wanted to add a comment in there. I know the situation from island to island might be different, but the Bahamas had a similar situation. We had to actually barge in water from one of our outer islands into the capital. And we did that for quite a while before we upgraded our infrastructure to be able to provide water. Another thing that we did was to provide access to water. It still has to be carried by buckets or jugs, but practically just about every community has access to a public standpipe where persons can access water. But as I said, as I mentioned earlier, the situation might differ from island to island and country to country. But drawing on what we'll be discussing tomorrow in terms of resilient infrastructure, I think it's very important that we begin to look and see how we can develop the infrastructure for providing clean water to the various islands in terms of, implementing reverse osmosis systems if they're not ready existing, how we can get those systems into the various islands and those parts that may not have access to clean water, or perhaps how we can, pool our resources as a region and share resources as a region in terms of trying to get clean water to those rural areas and those areas that may not have access to it. But we really need to consider the infrastructure that we have and the technology and infrastructure that may be available or that is available. We need to draw on the innovation of young people in trying to solve some of these clean water challenges that we might have. And I think that it's, someone mentioned political will earlier, and I think that's very important because, as citizens, we really should be putting more pressure on our governments to, to take on some more legislative responsibility where the commitment to clean water is, required by law, and governments are committed and are responsible for ensuring access to clean water by law. And I think that is the approach that we really need to take. We need to advocate for legislation to be implemented that really kind of, forces the governments of the various countries to be committed to providing the infrastructure necessary for accessing clean water. So I just wanted to add that in there because it's not as simple as it might seem sometimes. And we need to take an infrastructure approach. We need to take a legislative approach, and we really need all hands on deck to ensure that we address these clean water access issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rashad, and I agree with you 100%. What I think also within the region, not only discussing the issues of legislature, but when the Caribbean region goes to regional and international meetings such as COP and the discussion about climate change in terms of COP28, which is taking place in November of this year within our Caribbean island states, we must be able to ask for that assistance at that level. And unfortunately, because we are pressed for time, we cannot take any further comments. But I do encourage you to continue sending your comments within the chat, and I'm just going to recognize two more. One person is agreeing with the last speaker, and she says, yes, legislative frameworks are key to the solutions in this regard. And Latoya also said youth organizations should not only be part of the discussion, but support businesses that are already taking action. And one of our members, and she's making a shout out, Mr. Doreen Jeffrey, Eco Wash Mobile Car Wash, yes, I'm familiar, in Trinidad and Tobago. 2 liters to wash clean cars, talking about conservation, which Araya spoke to. Guys, we are near the end of this panel discussion on Sustainable Development Goal 6, access to water and sanitation for all, and sanitation, for all, clean water. So I'm going to go right into Karina. So Karina, just your final comments, as well as just to share with us, how do you think young people should be engaged and why? And let's hear your final comments. Let's keep it snappy so that we can move on to the next discussion this evening. Karina.
Okay, first I just want to say thank you so much to the panel, to the team, Shane, Araya, and Janelle. Thank you so much for sharing this panel as well as the team. One of the things that we can say going forward, it's very, very important that rural communities throughout the Caribbean and Commonwealth are really given the attention that's needed towards this water issue. And I think for young people to get more involved, like we want to say SDG 6.6, if you go and you check on the UN SDG, you would see that there are much more things that we can do to protect our ecosystem. And if we can get more involved in NGOs, organizations, you don't have to have a fancy title, guys, or a big position. You just have to have the passion and the cause. So you can do things like cleanup activities, talk about wetlands, Marine Day, try to find things that really protect water and, forests, things that really harbor where water is stored, and really push for that initiative. So young people, we are the change we want to see. And thanks so much for the opportunity. And this is SDG 6, clean water and sanitation for all. Let's do our part by 2030. Thank you.
Straight over to you, Janelle.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Karina, as well for Shane for facilitating these discussions. In my closing remarks, I'd just like to say, we've heard a lot about the challenges and the issues, but we've also need to recognize that young people are innovators in our own right. And so we have, been implementing a lot of these type of solutions, and there are best practices that have been recognized across different spaces that are worth sharing with each other. Our colleague Rashad spoke about the importance of the infrastructure and the legislative frameworks, and while those are critical, we also need to recognize the importance of the 4 C's in anything that we attempt to do: cohesion, collaboration, communication, and it being community driven. And so I think that as young people moving forward, while it is that oftentimes we are daunted because we feel as though our voices aren't being heard, or that the issues that are being addressed may not necessarily resonate with us, we do have, the opportunity to collaborate with others to see where our interests intersect, to be able to, amplify the kind of work that is being done. And so moving forward, I think that if we are to have that kind of engagement, we have to make sure that it's addressing the specific needs, the specific wants of young people, and making sure that we are involved not just at the end where there's implementation, but from the preparatory phase right up through to execution, so that we can have that kind of buy-in that we require. And so thank you again to everyone for being able to provide this space for us to share, and we're looking forward to the discussions that follow. Over to you, Shane.
Thank you, and Araya.
Yes, I didn't correct anyone earlier, but it's Aria.
Aria, if I wish.
It's okay. Thank you, Shane, for facilitating such a very rich discussion. And thank you for those who participated. I just want to share here publicly. Thank you, Trina, for your contribution. Very well spoken and very true. And I just would like to conclude and say in creating those opportunities for solutions and for young people, we need to really be cognizant of the existing conditions. And we need to understand that there are variations, not just between countries, but within countries as well. And going to the young people and really hearing what can I do to help you be a part of this is also very important. I know we want young people to take charge and take agency, but my gosh, I cannot say how often we have these things and the individuals who are at the highest arm of decision-making are still leaving us out. And once those decisions are made and you see projects happening, what can we do then, right? So from this discussion and from these future discussions, I really would like to see more coming out of this, where we look at best fit, not just best practices, but best fit and best suited for our Caribbean brothers and sisters, our young people throughout the region.
Thank you. There is need for young people to be included in every aspect of development and the process in each and every SDG. There must be advocacy for this. If there is consultation, youth should be included. For training, youth should be included. For educational opportunities, examples, scholarships, even then others with more experiences who are older get opportunities for youth. Even in Belize, there is WASH training happening via the Social Investment Fund, but it does not focus or include an aspect for training of youths. Trina continued within the chat box. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, my fellow young people, my name is Shane John, and we have been discussing SDG 6, and it's a topic on clean water and access to water, and we have been joined by Aria, Janelle, and Karina, and this has been indeed a fruitful discussion. And I want to leave with you here this evening. For anyone who can solve the problems of water will be noble and worthy of a Nobel Prize, one for peace and one for science. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Shane, for your incredible work and facilitation. And of course, to our lovely, lovely speakers, all-woman panel, we love to see it. And so we move quickly along to our second discussion on SDG 7, which is ensuring access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. And this will be facilitated by the illustrious Mr. Shamar Weatherburn from the Caribbean Regional Youth Council. And so I pass over to him.
In the words of the last 30 seconds of the previous facilitator, young people should be involved in every step of involvement towards these SDGs. There must be advocacy projects. Their voices have to ring through. Hello and welcome everyone to our next session, which is focused on SDG 7. I hope you had a lovely time discussing SDG 6, and I hope you stick around because I have a feeling we're going to have another excellent one just as you stay with us. SDG 7, for those who aren't aware, just need the reminder, is really focused on ensuring that we have access to reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. We want to essentially tackle these issues such as that people have always been facing in terms of where they're issues regarding renewable energy. There's issues with regards to clean energy for cooking solutions. There's energy that's also required for all of these activities from health, education, and all the aspects that involve young people. We want to hear, therefore, what are the ways in which we can address these things to ensure that there's more efficiency in the running of our societies, that we're able to do all of this is better productivity. How this also relates to issues with socioeconomic conditions. How is it that we can improve every single way that this future for young persons have in store? But you won't be hearing it from me. I have exceptional 3 speakers who will be taking you ahead of this. So what we're going to do this afternoon is you're going to hear some remarks from those 3 speakers each, and then we'll pose a bit of questions to them and get the conversation going. And then, of course, we'll have an open floor discussion where you can have your time to ask your questions. So for those of you in the Zoom, please raise your hand, shoot us the question, have a conversation, a chat. We want to hear from you. And for those joining us on live stream, also send it in. Our team is here to pick up your questions and your thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. So please stick with us. So I'm going to start off with just the first speaker in introducing them as he makes his way forward. And it's Mr. Giovanni Henry. And I'll tell you a bit about him. Mr. Giovanni Henry is a climate and development professional hailing from the Helen of the West Indies, St. Lucia. He has extensive work in climate issues, particularly in climate finance at the national, regional, and international level. He previously worked as Foreign Service Officer with the government of St. Lucia, as well as Climate Change Unit of the Commonwealth Secretariat. And he's also co-authored a practical guide on enhancing access to climate finance. These are what we'll want to hear in his discussion, but also, and in the capacity, especially speaking to you today, he's recently appointed to the UN Secretary General Youth Advisory Board on climate change, being the first from the Caribbean to do so. And he's currently a fellow for the small island states. Mr. Giovanni Henry will give us his remarks and listen attentively as he starts us off. Mr. Henry, your time.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Facilitator, and I hope I can be heard clearly throughout. Of course, yeah, let me just first commend the organizers, the several organizers who have sort of put together this initiative, which I think is quite timely, and it's also quite useful to ensure that we gather the views of not only the voices often heard, but as many as possible, particularly from the Caribbean region. You know, I often say when I speak of the Caribbean region is that we are in really and truly turbulent times, even on the aspect of energy. So I tend to rock the boat a bit with my remarks. So I would go with your guidance as a facilitator to ensure that I do not rock the boat a bit too much, but let's see how that goes. I think, yeah, essentially, of course, you know, we're talking about the issue of SDG 7 and the sort of access and clean access to energy. And, you know, I always say that it's an area which we've untapped in, we've yet to really tap into. And of course, I think we've gotten to the stage where I try not to spend too much time on the challenges. Of course, we know our challenges. We know we hear it every day. We hear it every year. We see it in our everyday lives. And it's important that we adopt a solution-oriented approach, particularly now heading into, achieving, if you want to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, if you want to achieve the various targets for 2030, of course, you know, under the SDG 7, where we have 5 major targets and the various 6 indicators beneath that. Question is, I like to put a question out to the audience. Where does your country stand within this? What progress has been made? I think that's the fundamental step, is to sort of understand that sort of national context. Where does your country stand? And then from there, you can see, okay, this is an area I could tap into. This is an area I can support. Perhaps I can support the work of this organization. So it's about, I think, just a question I like to put out there, first of all, to the audience to see, you know, go online and find out where is your country doing in the progress under that SDG. And I think that is the entry point to really and truly drive. Like I said, it's the years of action. So I'll stop here for now. And of course, yeah, we'll take the discussion forward later on. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Giovanni. You see, he's introduced us as everyone to interesting nuggets in our presentation. I hope therefore everyone is primed and ready, loading up all with your questions and everything that you need to be asking him. But of course, we have another speaker as well. Our next speaker is Miss Khadija Osh, and I'll just tell you a bit about her. She makes her way forward. Ms. Khadija is a graduate student pursuing a doctorate in international energy science at Kyoto University in Japan. So she's making all her way here just to speak to us with a little over 6 actually years of experience in energy policy, in planning and strategy. She serves as a generation planning engineer at Belize Electricity Limited from 2015 to 19, where those duties encompass management of the local and international energy supply, including liaising between utility independent power producers and supporting regulatory affairs. While working during the periods of 2016 to 2018, she completed an MBA from University South Wales. She then pursued further graduate study in terms of energy science. She proceeded to PhD study at Kyoto now, and she's also doing energy policy associate at the energy unit for the CARICOM Secretariat under the Regional Energy Apprenticeship Program. Ladies and gentlemen, our speakers are here to give you an extensive time. So I'll just allow Ms. Usher to come forward next and to speak with you. Ms. Usher, see you smiling, everyone. She's ready. Please give us your attention as she makes her way.
Thank you, Shamar. I am smiling because I don't think I've received such an eloquent and energetic introduction before. So thank you very much for that. It is a pleasure to be here, first of all. It is very early on a Thursday morning for me, and you're winding down your day. So I really want to get right into it. I love that SDG 7 is following SDG 6, especially in water, clean water, because there is so much for us to piggyback on, as well as to introduce some new content. So there's a lot to unpack with SDGs. These are given as one-line sentences, but just within it, we are balancing so many things. And so just to reiterate, when you started, you said SDG 7 is about ensuring access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. There is so much to unpack there, more than we can do in one session. But the important, I think, aspect of all of this coming out for our Caribbean region especially is this understanding of energy equity. And ensuring that we are moving with a philosophy of nobody gets left behind. And on this, I can definitely speak substantially from a regulatory standpoint that we do have such mandates in place, especially when we look at how for our electricity and other energy services, these are regulated and legislated. But I liked a couple comments that were made in SDG 6, which in that mobilization on the ground level is very much different. And this is especially where I think young people need to come in. I love the first panelist's comments in terms of young people. It starts with getting informed. Energy tends to be still dominated by the technocrats, and this is not an easy arena to break through. But I do think that especially post the 1992 UNFCCC, when it was brought into the spotlight that, hey, we have this sector, which is the single largest contributor to emissions globally. And as such, we need radical reorganization urgently. The information and the data and the understanding is progressively getting more palatable for everybody to understand. And it does not have to be said or approached in, I'd say, a high-level manner. Every person, every human being now can understand how energy is our socioeconomic battery. And it speaks directly to the quality of life of individuals. Particularly in Belize, we are championing a 96% electricity access rate at the moment. And this is something that we keep trying to balance with, especially population growth, industrialization, which will be a very big boom across the region, and particularly for the Central American demographic, immigration patterns, because these bringing growth that we need to plan and prepare for, and not just in the way of getting the access or getting it at a price which people can begin to afford across the board, again, this idea of equity, but also from sources that will ensure that the next generation will also have access to this. And this is where the sustainability part comes in. So I just want to once again emphasize these SDGs, especially SDG 7. It's a one-liner, but it has so much work to be done, so much to unpack. Affordability, reliability, sustainability, and modernization. We really have a lot of work ahead. And as the first panelist remarked, it is almost like we have barely tapped into the potential of this transition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Usher. You've given us a lot to think about, especially with regards to those conversations just around how it's currently dominated by technocrats, but there's still a lot that can be unpacked. And I'm sure our next speaker is also going to give us other perspectives that encourage our audience to their questions forward. And that next speaker that I'm going to introduce is Ms. Nisha Ramdas, who is a passionate energy analyst from the Twin Island Republic, Trinidad and Tobago. She's a graduate of the University of the West Indies, having completed her Bachelor of Science degree with major in Environmental and Natural Resource Management and a main minor in entrepreneurship. Ms. Ramdas has developed a keen interest for energy policy and those issues that surround them, which led her to pursue a master's in business administration in sustainable energy management. Her desire to educate the public on the energy sector led her to actually in the unique direction of becoming a modern energy blogger. We're gonna have some real fun with asking her questions. She has to date written for Loop TT, which is a Caribbean news outlet, outside of her consistent posts, read her personal energy blog, aptly entitled energytt.com. And I don't even think you can appreciate, the genius of it, Ms. Ramdas, but I'm sure you're going to tell them a lot more about it. Ms. Ramdas, please take it away and speak to us.
Good afternoon to everyone. I hope you're hearing me fine. Thank you for involving me in such a discussion, because I think everyone that came before me, you all just made my opening remarks a little much easier. And what I want us to take note of, and I think Khadija would have just touched on it, is that even though it's two totally different sustainable development goals, what you're going to notice is that the conversation is being translated. So it is literally the same points, the same things that we need to unpack, but we're just applying it to a separate goal, right? Sorry, goal. And one thing I want to touch on, and it really struck out to me, was Janelle made a comment that we are the ones with the knowledge to then take to those who don't have that knowledge to make that change or to push further, right? Sustainable Development Goal 7 is very, very unique to the Caribbean region for the mere fact that we have a very, like, I would consider it a unicorn. It's a very weird situation we're in. So while on one hand, we're small island developing states and climate change is very real to us, we also have to take into consideration that in the Caribbean region, we have some of the largest oil and gas producers in the world, my country being a very big example of that, right? So what we need to do now is to not only action change and implement the strategies to move towards this goal, but we also need to form sort of a balance where, you know, the economy isn't suffering along with it. And that is why I really, really, like, I'm buzzing for this discussion, because I believe between the three of us, we'll come up with three totally different perspectives, but also interlink them as well, right? So what are some of the things that we need to consider, especially on my end, going into this conversation? We have, again, a large amount of oil and gas producers. We also have high energy costs, unreliable energy supply, because we've seen it, hurricanes come, they rampage through countries. How are we going to recover from that, right? And not only that, Khadija touched on energy equity, right? And we also have a heavy dependence on fossil fuels. So while some parts of the region, you will see big strides being made towards renewable energy, again, I can use my country as a perfect example. There isn't anything substantially being done. We've seen, you know, strategies, we've seen frameworks, we've seen plans, but what realistically is being done to meet this target? At first, it was like, I think they mentioned, I think it was like 2021, we were supposed to achieve, I think, like a 10 to 15% cut in emissions. 21 passed, nothing was done. Now we move from 2021 to another year, and the year keeps being pushed back, and what is being done, right? So I think we have a unique position now where we're having these discussions among ourselves, but then we could go back to our individual countries or individual groups or individual organizations and transfer and translate this knowledge so that now we could say, okay, we're doing this, we need to hold those in power in like accountable for what is being said. If you said 2021, what is being done? Because we are that generation, and I think those in that generation before us, no, we are that generation to not mess around. We are the ones to say, okay, we want to see this. Come on, let's make it happen. We are the go-getters. As opposed to before, you know, it's more of a reactive thing. We are the ones who now want to be proactive, and we don't want to be left behind and say, okay, the ocean is coming, global sea levels are rising, a majority of us are islands. Let's not wait till one day we wake up and part of the shoreline gone. What are we going to do now? What are we going to put in place? So I'm really, really buzzing. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Thank you so much. And those have been our speakers, have they introduced themselves to you, everyone. So we've given us so many perspectives, especially Ms. Ramdas at the end. We aptly summarize just some of what we've been hearing so far. You know, I do want you to even start thinking of just some of those perspectives and everything that we've just been hearing so far and all those key issues. But just to start you off, I do want to pose us a question just to all three of it. Just kind of, I want to start us on this point because I know many people have been thinking it. We heard it as with Khadija was speaking just about how one of the challenges that we have is that the conversation on energy particularly is still with the technocrats a bit, and we persons feel like it's not something that a young person will involved in doing. How can the three of you, just from your perspective, think that's the best way in which young persons can have a start in playing a role in actually helping some of these micro issues that fall under this SDG particularly? We're going to start with Giovanni, and then we'll go to Khadija, and then Ms. Ramdas again.
Yeah, thanks, Shama. If you don't mind, I was like starting off with this story when I speak about energy. There's back in 2007, hope I'm not giving my age, but I was in primary school, and it was at a science fair. And there was a particular school, and they had this solar-powered car. And I will admit, you know, quite young, and this was the first time I was sort of exposed to seeing that how that aspect of energy, you know, and seeing that firstly one, which we didn't like, but at the same time, it sort of, how do you call it, the bulbs, it sparks an interest into see that how we could use a natural resource. And these were children. And, you know, and oftentimes, you know, when you speak of young people, and we oftentimes forget that there are those who have a wealth of knowledge and a way of thinking which is quite unique, and that is children. And that is why I want to sort of pivot this point to say that it's a case where how can we really and truly engage with these sort of groups? And we all have to play a role. You know, when you look at the gathering here today, we have from civil society, you know, we have from private sector, government representatives, and so on here. And you could see that how can we support these sort of innovative ideas, which are really and truly, it starts from the children, you know. Yes, you know, you may see a 16-year-old, 18-year-old who comes up with a marvelous idea, but it starts from that young age. And the question is that how do we support their efforts? You know, do we just, I'm all about practical examples. Do we just use these science fairs and then just, we present the ideas and then just throw it away? How can we support these ideas which are being developed at the primary level? You know, and to allow them to scale up and provide that support to grow. You know, up to last week, someone introduced me to what's this thing called Chat GPT. Sorry, I think I'm getting older, whatnot it is, but it's sort of artificial intelligence, you know, and frankly, it scared me. But at the same time, is there a scope for artificial intelligence to accelerate the energy transition that we're looking for? And mind you, not just the energy transition, but a just energy transition. How can artificial intelligence support that? Again, I'm not the scientist here, but these are the sort of things which we need to sort of look into, the innovative approaches. And that is where young people are interested in, you know. I mean, that is the areas where, you know, beyond just the traditional ways of building the solar panels, for example, and so on. But there are new ways in terms of, you know, using the technologies and so on. And these ideas will come from the young people, but also come from the children as well. And it's important that we continue to see how do we engage young children in that regard, because it is critical, you know, that we help in supporting that just, and I keep saying that just energy transition, because, you know, like you said, you know, I mean, some of our countries are oil and gas producing countries, and we need to ensure that we protect lives and livelihoods in particular. And it's important that we have that just transition, because there is a scope for significant amount of jobs within the green jobs, you know, within the energy sector, particularly for our region. You know, I always say, for example, St. Lucia, we have this tripartite approach where we have solar on one end, geothermal, as well as wind, and we're yet to really tap into it as much as we can. The technology is there, but then of course we have to get over, first of all, the legislative challenges which allow us to generate as much. Then of course we have to get the technology, and of course the cost. So there are, you know, several barriers, but I think it's the catalyst, and I keep saying that is not only us as young people, I like saying us because I think I'm still young, but also children as well, who could really and truly, they can start that spark. And you will be surprised at how they can create that spillover effect. And I know there are individuals on this call who are working with children in various sustainable development areas, and they would tell you that how just one child telling to the other, let us turn off this light, and then when we're not in use, and you'd see the ripple effect, others start to follow suit and so on. So I just want to ensure that we sort of, you know, not negate the importance of children in that regard, and I think that is where our real catalyst will be in driving that just energy transition. Yeah.
Thank you so much on that particular. And just as before we move on to Khadija gave us an interesting perspective just around the children. And I remember during when we were speaking and you were talking to us about equity, he said that children are important. You know, just each of us telling us, let us turn off that light, and that can start to make that difference. As you just continue telling us about the youth in particular, I just do want to mention there that something that Giovanni didn't get to, which is that, you know, education, those children will also need equity, but depending on sometimes persons in more remote areas, persons in much more marginalized areas, the energy it's not equitable across everywhere. So just how do you also think that adds into that question of young people taking that into consideration as they try to get involved?
Definitely. We have disparity in our societies across the region, and we need to account for this. Now, one very, very important tool is digitalization and the incorporation of ICTs, because what this does is allow us to reach those even in the most remote areas once we are able to install the infrastructure to support these systems. So I know one of the very important projects that we work on within rural communities is once we get there, ensure that they have a platform for communication, ensure that they have a platform to sustain whatever technology is implemented within the region, within a certain radius. That is because although we are centrally deploying these systems, it is up to the community to maintain these systems. So with these two, once you kind of marry these two, it's very handy in terms of getting both a more level playing field across the demographic within the communities, and this is why it's so important. Now, in terms of energy, and specifically for young people, the sector in terms of youth engagement is sluggish. I will admit that, and I wish I could say that the institutions, the government, the civil society, the private sector, the organizations will be the ones who start to reach out to you. The legacy does not show that. And change within these very incumbent institutions, it's not likely to happen. So if I were to speak to the youth directly, my suggestion would be to really zero in on the opportunities and build your individual climate trajectory. And by this, I mean, when you want to zero into the opportunities, figure out what it is the trends are and figure out what we do not know and how you can make a difference in that retrospect. So the shifts in terms of our energy systems, we are seeing that they are increasingly getting more digitalized, they're more interconnected, and they're more decentralized. And what this means is that a lot more of the activity will be moved from the classical central government or state control activity into the communities. And this is where we want to be pushing aspects of STEM, especially across academia, starting from primary education, moving up. Because once they get access to the tools, what we're developing is an agile and learning culture. Because I can tell you, for example, one of the main issues that has been brought up is the use of from energy sources that are not from renewable sources. But I can tell you, I stem from a country where we actually ran about 80% record-breaking renewable the previous prior year during the COVID-19 pandemic. Sure, demand was relatively low and we had good weather conditions to support our hydroelectric and our biomass production, yes. But even stemming from a country like this, I have seen years where I'm planning as a generation planner, where we have drought-like conditions and we are strapped for capacity and we need to figure out ways to solve these issues. So what I'm saying is, right now, yes, we are challenged by the main problem, which is addressing the existential crisis of climate change. But with the new technology and new innovation, you know how they say progress brings problems. We have seen progress and we are now faced with additional problems. But the idea is when you reorganize the sector and the culture to be one of learning and incorporating these tools within and giving it to the people and letting them build this culture of learning from the start, we will then be able to handle whatever the challenge may be as it evolves, because the challenges will evolve. There's no endpoint to this. So that's really what I would advise specifically for young people. And one way I would push and really lobby for, especially with energy, is mentorship, seeking mentorship. If you know the trajectory and you build an idea of where you want to go, whether you want that difference to be in academia, publishing and getting documentation out there for the region, whether you want it to be institutional or advocacy, start to plan the building blocks of getting to where you be, and really try to dial in to those within the sector to see how you can grow in that way, because the institutions, the government, the civil society, progress is being made for youth engagement, but it is slow. So we will have to push in that regard.
And thank you so much. And you've given us a lot to think about. Just that as we run on the time, I just want to acknowledge and encourage the persons that have been speaking within the chat so far. As you gear up with your question, there's been an exceptional comment in the chat so far just around a solution for youth involvement, just around a policy as well. But I'll also acknowledge a question being asked in the chat, and I'll throw it out to Ms. Ramdas since we're on our way next to her as well. It's from Ms. Norales, who asked Ms. Ramdas. She says, how does the Caribbean manage the contradiction of being the home to major fossil fuel extractors, but also being vulnerable to climate disasters? Because essentially, who gets the economical benefit from the remaining carbon credits with common and differentiated responsibilities? That question is from Ms. Norales. Ms. Ramdas, get away.
So I think in the case of this, as I indicated before, it's a very intricate balance, because we know that oil and gas for a lot of countries, it's bread and butter. So at the end of the day, we cannot just say, okay, no to fossil fuels, no to oil and gas. Let's just dive headfirst into renewables, right? And Mr. Henry spoke about the just transition. So what we need to do, and this is what is not taking place, in my opinion, and I'm glad I'm part of this panel, because I'm also one of those who makes those outlandish statements that push people and provoke people to do better, right? So one thing we need to do is, we're seeing the two broad sides of the spectrum: renewables for a better world, a better quality of life, and a more sustainable future. And on the other end, we're seeing oil and gas as our livelihoods. So now, how do we progress further without regressing in any way? So what we try to promote, and I will use Trinidad and Tobago as an example, because I can't speak on that. We try to promote a hybrid energy mix. So one way we could do that, so if it is we utilize a certain amount of natural gas for electricity, we could then say, okay, let's incorporate renewables into our energy mix. We utilize renewables for our electricity. We take that natural gas that's being displaced, we use it in our downstream sector to now provide more revenue for our country, right? So this is one particular way in Trinidad where we can balance that. But at the end of the day, in order for that to happen, we need strategy. And this strategy is something that's been in the works for the longest while. How are we now, as the youth, going to push this agenda further, right? And Mr. Henry made a statement prior about, he spoke about his experience as a child seeing that solar-powered car, right? And that's amazing to me, because I usually give my perspective on this, and I'm a true advocate, as Ms. Khadija was talking about just now, about promoting that new type of education into our system. So I didn't have exposure to renewables or anything along the sort of sustainability, probably till I was like in secondary school. That wasn't part of my primary school curriculum. And I think that we need a total culture shift. Now, are we going to, yes, we're going to target everybody for this culture shift, but do we want the big stick mentality where we're standing up over, our population, targeting the older crowd and saying, well, you need to do this, you need to do that? Or do we start from a lower level where, the 5, the 6, the 7-year-olds come home and they're telling them, mom, take off your lights. I learned that in school. Mom, let's try to do this or do that. Let's recycle, let's do all these things. So we need to have that sort of implementation within our education system from such a young age, where they're not going to wait till they're 15, 16, or 17 to be exposed to this. And I think a really, really good point that was made before is mentorship, right? So if we have all these strategies in place where the youth now is educated and aware, they can now take this to the public. So I want you to follow me. It's a chain reaction, right? We have the youth educated, aware, empowered. they now take this information to the general public. The general public are the ones who should benefit from the resources of the country, right? So they are now going to hold the country, the leaders of the country, I should say, more accountable and say, okay, if it says we are going to use oil and gas, we're going to benefit from every molecule that is going to come out of the ground. And in order to do so, what is the maximum benefit we could get from this? And the best case scenario for us is a hybridized energy mix, right? We need to have some sort of integration in place. So to answer your question, I know I went like 50 different ways with 50 different points, but to answer your question, I don't think it's a hard switch from one to the next. It's a very fine line that we kind of need to toe. And in order to do that, we need to make a gradual progression along the way.
No, thank you. You've given us an absolute bunch of things to think about. Youth, educated, aware, empowered. If we're going to benefit from every single molecule out of that grant. I just want to also highlight and acknowledge again some of the excellent conversations taking place in the chat. For those of us who are following on the YouTube as well, for the benefit of all, Mr. Dwight Ward just talks about, gives his perspectives on how we need to combat some of these challenges. He says to continue to promote renewable energies, private sector collaboration, promoting more renewable sources. He wants us to focus on improving efficiency, and all individuals have to be part of this mechanism as well. We also have an exceptional conversation being taken place. I'm going to turn into a question to just come to you, Mr. Henry, in a second. I'll wait on more questions. It's just around that we've heard this conversation from Nisha just around. Well, let's take it from that local level then, in terms of the young people needing to be aware and they take it to the general public. You know, Taisha Emmanuel started a conversation in the chat where she mentions in terms of enforcing some of these creative ideas with regards to children within our youth policies, and also making sure that those are part of the youth engagement strategies overall. Do you think that this would be helped, or do you think perhaps we can't get them enforced in policy? What's your thoughts on this overall as we try to see how we can bring it just from that ground level, local level up?
So I believe with regards to youth involvement in that aspect, what we need to consider, it's not just public, it's not just organizations. We also have a private sector that has a huge part to play in this, right? So we have, most of us, what I would like to think, we're working people, right? So all of us belong to some sort of organization. And personally, where I work, we try to promote community involvement, especially with aligning to the SDGs. That is actual projects that we are executing. So we don't just go helter-skelter, do CSR, and not be targeted in any way where we can't just report back on it afterwards, right? So by fostering partnerships between organizations like this that are having the panel discussions, and then organizations that are in the private sector of the country, the public sector of the country, what can we do now? And I'm posing the question to you all, right? So what can we do now to foster those partnerships to then now provide funding and resources? Because the youth have these great ideas. Khadija said we're innovators. There's so much innovation taking place, but where's the capital? How are they going to progress? We don't want them, because I can speak on behalf of myself. I've been fighting this fight with regards to sustainability since like 2015. And this is actually the first time I'm speaking on this in like about 3 years. And I'm glad I did, because there was a point where I really got, like, I was so dejected and I was like so unmotivated, because I feel like we're saying the same things repeatedly and we're not seeing the change. And I don't want that for the youth that is coming up after me. So now what role do I play in fostering that relationship and that partnership, so that now if, let's say, a youth man in my community comes and says, you know, I have this project in mind and I want to incorporate energy efficiency and energy conversation into our community center. How can you help me? I'll say, you know what? Let me contact this organization, because maybe they could provide funding, they could provide capital for you, because they have these great ideas, but we don't want them to reach that point where they're trying and they're not getting through. So how can we be the bridge now for them to foster that partnership and push them a little further? Because I don't want the youth after me to have to go through the same struggle that I went through, when I could break that ceiling for them and they could definitely go out and, you know, get more done. So yeah.
Yes. I love that so much. And Giovanni, and I know this is particularly an area in which DPE can assist us with as well, just in terms of, so like we said, we were talking just around those ideas that young persons can get involved with, you know, the science spheres, the young person, the children in particular. But then Ms. Ramdas gave us interesting points just about supporting those initiatives, capital. And I also know you've been involved with this in terms of climate finance as well. How do you think they can get started on those things that Ms. Ramdas says, just so we don't, so what are our solutions with regards to that and capital and balancing it? What do you say your thoughts on that are?
Yeah, no, quickly, just before I answer this, in terms of the point made on policy and how do we integrate that sort of youth role within policy, I always say it's simple. It's beyond just involving young people in developing the policies and the framework and so on. We want to be involved in three things. The planning aspect, of course, that's perfectly fine. Implementation to ensure that, you know, things are moving, that's perfectly fine. But also monitoring and evaluation, because it's a case where, you know, we say, oh, okay, we started this progress, this transition, but then how do we monitor, are we on par, you know, and we just kick, you know, us as young people to the curb and then there's no progress being made. Because remember, we are also sort of supposedly the watchdogs to ensure that things are being done accordingly. So it's important that all aspects are covered. And I think that is a fundamental area which we need to ensure that it's being missed, because you see these fantastic projects started. But even for the youth-led projects as well, where there's that aspect of how do we monitor and evaluate to provide us with that solid evidence that we are making progress, and that can be used to leverage further support. So when you speak about the finance and so on, there are existing initiatives. I mean, we have here positive more than 12 countries represented here, and there are positive initiatives being done in various, whether it be solar, whether it be wind and so on, various aspects of the energy transition. But then the question is, how do we transmit that learning? How do we ensure that we share that learning, and how do we see that, okay, this is a positive example. Can we utilize this in another island where there is a similar situation, and how can we then allow that to scale up? Because oftentimes, you know, we speak about accessing the funding and so on, and we may have limited capacity as one island, but the OECS islands joining together. If we push in more of that regional approaches, and we have the regional bodies, you know, I often say I don't think we give them, this Giovanni speaking here, we don't give them enough work to do, you know, where we capitalize on that regional approach, that sub-regional approach to accessing finance along the spectrum of the sustainable development pillars, because that will allow us to have a greater impact. That will allow us to have that sort of multitude impact beyond just economic, social, and we can have that tangible footprint that can actually allow us to move the needle. And remember, I spoke about rocking the boat at the beginning. Well, that is the way we can truly and truly rock the boat in the energy sector, and then push a cohesive, just energy transition. After all, we're similar islands. Yeah, we're brothers and sisters, no?
Thank you so much for that, Giovanni. And again, even during the time, we've had more conversation in the chat from Trina Palacio, who tells us that, she says, donor organizations are continually encouraging governments to look further at development of human capital, but a lot of governments, you know, focus much more on infrastructure development over human development. Khadija, I just want real quick, because I know we're getting to the time of wrap up soon. What do you believe that how can more emphasize on that human development as well, even though we spoke in your presentation a lot about infrastructural and how we're a bit sluggish on that as we continue to lobby for partnerships and persons, as Khadija answered. Let's get your final kind of comments in. Now we're heading towards the end, and everyone. And afterwards, I'll invite our speakers to also give their wrap up and final comments. But Khadija, put the comment in the chat.
You know, I was reading the chat at the same time, and I was like,
saw your smile, nice sense. Where you go?
This is heavy. It's very heavy though, because it's tough. What we need to understand is that a lot of our structure and system for the energy sector is built from a short-termism viewpoint, but that was out of necessity, because we are strapped for resources. And I think it was from the SDG 6, where Janelle said, how can I go into a household where the single parent is struggling to pay the bill and tell them that we need to divert these funds towards so-and-so, which will pay off for us 10 years from now, 20 years from now, right? So the immediate rewards that we always try to capture when we develop policies is justified in a sense, because it is needed. But especially for young people, this is where your endurance comes in and teaching us how to play the long game. But the idea that Mr. Henry brought up is, how can we see this? And the evidence is needed. So we need to be able to start to interpret the information that is coming in about our energy sector better, to show the long-term payoffs and to see how these type investment now will prove beneficial, and how we can start to reap this even earlier. And we get this by really starting to dig into the evidence. But working, I would say, from I think that's very theoretical, that's very academia, that's a lot of what I do in my study. But if I'm working from a very practical standpoint, one of the concerns I do have is that I notice there is quite a bit of waste from the ministerial standpoint. There is so many areas that, and Mr. Henry said that we can work together between countries, but I noticed just within countries itself, there's so much inter-ministerial synergies that we can capitalize on that we are not. We're spending a lot of resources allocated within water sector, energy sector, food sector, transport sector, when all of these systems are so interconnected now that a lot can be pooled. And I see a lot of wastage. And that is one of the areas that we're trying to really work into policy and getting young people, especially, to understand, because it's not a problem that we will solve in, I think, even my generation. It is something that we're going to have to really learn how to be much more, how to really tailor our trajectories better, and learn how to understand, as I said, evidence that is presented, so that we can really transform that into implementable solutions that are affordable and sustainable in the long run. So it's a difficult task, but I think the important thing to look back at in this discussion is that the young people in this generation with information and access to it is the best equipped ones to deal or to handle this or to figure these issues out, to understand these uncertainties that we're facing and come up with the solutions for it. Because what is being shown is that the conventional style of planning, the conventional style of pricing, and the conventional style of regulating is starting to phase out. And we need to address these issues in the policy, in the legislation, in the regulation, for our systems to be working better and as efficiently, as optimized as they can be.
Thank you so much, Ms. Oshan. You've given us a lot to think about, as have all of our speakers, our participants, our audiences. We've just heard a lot of issues and things today, stemming from high energy cost, our balancing between us as oil and gas producers, how it is that, how we have to balance the equity and our funding. And I do want to then invite our speakers just to briefly, starting with Ms. Ramdas, let's give us their final closing of thoughts, as I think we've had a riveting discussion here so far, boosted by our audience, just around 30, 45 seconds or so. And then we'll go back to Giovanni, and then we'll round out again with Khadija again, as I acknowledge everyone. Ms. Ramdas?
So once again, let me close off by saying thank you for the opportunity to share in this discussion, because I've learned so much throughout this entire time, right? Not just like communicating with you what I know, but I was able to receive that information as well to kind of translate or transform my thoughts to adapt better, right? I think for us as the Caribbean region, implementation of the SDG 7 is really, really important for economic growth, poverty reduction, and environmental sustainability, right? And we need to be very real about this. The youth has a critical role to play in it, right? I don't really refer to myself as a youth anymore, right? But what I do is I try to facilitate that for the youth that is upcoming and the youth that is coming up after me to now, as I said, break through and do more. So we all have a role to play in this end game and this goal. And as we know, youth involvement is very, very important for that. So by advocating for that youth involvement along with sustainable development within that energy sector, it's really important to achieve that overall goal that we are. But in order for that to take place, we need critical things. We need education and awareness. We need some sort of legislative reform, and then we need some sort of accountability with regards to the stuff that we mentioned before, the strategy and the planning and all of this. What is the roadmap moving forward? What is point A? What is point B? What is point C? And when are we expected to achieve these things moving further? And I think what we need to do is we need to think about, okay, not just from a SDG 7 perspective, or SDG 6 perspective, but total sustainable development, right? What are we going to do to not only like be the change we want to see in the world, but basically, what are we going to do to push boundaries, to be bolder, to be braver than the generation before us were, and kind of make that change that, you know, we want to see.
Thank you so much, Mr. Henry. Your closing out thoughts?
Yeah, no, in brief, and I think others have probably heard me say that as well. No matter what field you are in, the freebies, break down the language. That is not only in your work within the communities, but also, mind you, even if the politicians, because I can tell you, some of the energy terms, they don't get it. So they won't get that political well. So it's important that we break down the language in our interactions, but also bring forth solutions, the second B. Just like we're doing here in the chat, and I'm really glad to see sort of the responses coming through within. And that is what we want. It has to be solution oriented. So bring forth your solutions, and you'll be surprised to see how a simple idea can turn up into a business venture, you know. And of course, like I said, there's a lot of economic opportunities within that space. And thirdly, bridging the gap between both in terms of private sector, society organizations, NGOs, development partners. How do we bridge the gap that we no longer operate in silos, but we can, one, channel resources together, work together to get access in technical support and also financial support. And I think it's important. So if there's anything, if you forget everything else, just remember the freebies, to break down the language, bring forth your solutions, and of course, see how we can bridge that gap between all the key players. And I think that will set us on a better path, not only towards a just energy transition, but within the wider scope of the sustainable development agenda.
Thank you so much. And Khadija?
Sure, thanks, Shamar. Yeah, I really just want to reiterate my recommendations for my closing to young people. So really just first get informed, understand what we know, understand the challenges or what we do not know or what we cannot yet solve, and figure out your part in that. Secondly, once you do that, really zero in on these as not challenges, but as opportunities, and plan your career trajectory or plan your activism trajectory, whatever will be your climate role, plan that trajectory. And then finally, really understand the importance of endurance and what youthful energy brings to this game, because we are in it for the long run. And it is important to bring this philosophy to the legacy companies and institutions that are really much more focused on short-termism, immediate rewards, and bringing this understanding that we need to start looking at the long-term investment, both in our people, in our resources, and in our technologies. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I began our discussion by reiterating that young people have to be at the center of every discussion around these topics. And throughout the time we've been here, we've heard additional comments that our young people, this group of young people, are the most equipped to consult with these. They have to be made aware, they have to be empowered, they have to be educated, they have to be at the center. And we just heard many things across these conversations. And thank you so much for your comments from Gabriel Gay with regards to funding and big corporate persons, what we have to do. And Ms. Ellen Gopal, who've told us the mechanisms around sustainability and the private sector. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a session, but it's been a session. but still, there is more. So don't go anywhere as we try to summarize and wrap up this next conversation. Thank you for joining us. This has been our second session on SDG 7. I've been your facilitator, Shamara Wedderburn. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So we've had 2 hours of electric discussion, no pun intended. And so I want to, of course, thank our great panelists from our last session, Jeminic, Khadija, and of course, Ms. Ramdas for having the discussion, and Shamar for his brilliant facilitation. I think coming out of the discussion, there's so much to talk about, so many quotables, and I'm sure that will be a part of our social media campaign as we move toward the ECOSOC Youth Forum at the end of the month in SDG 6. We spoke about local and traditional knowledge as it relates to water conservation, disaster risk management, the experiences of Bahamas of barging in water from one island to another, the policing of water collection in places like Belize, and the fact that it is not mostly about rating, but about people's access and ease of access to water and sanitation that really mainstreams through all the SDGs. And then looking forward and going forward, we talk about being cognizant of the varying conditions and intersectionalities as it relates to rural communities, visibility and accessibility, and of course, nationwide and region-wide. And as we move to SDG 7, we spoke about finding out what our governments are doing, energy equity, and energy as a socio-economic battery. And I loved that commentary from Khadija, energy as a socio-economic battery, looking at our immigration patterns, looking at how the world is changing and moving, and climate migration as well. The importance of looking at technology and digitization, the use of AI, for example, as an opportunity to solve our problems. And then closing off, addressing the waste from the ministerial standpoint and capitalizing on our ministerial resources, planning, financing, regulating, and of course, Jeminic's final words of breaking down language, bringing forth solutions and bridging any gaps that we have. So that has been a bit of our conversation. Of course, there will be a report produced and this will be going to New York. And tomorrow we meet again here, well, not here, but on Kev's Politics. So please do follow them on Twitter. We'll be on Twitter Spaces, and we will be, our MC for tomorrow will be Mr. Franz George, and we'll be discussing SDG 9 and 11. Before we go, I am being mandated by my colleagues to have everyone who wants to put on their camera, put it on so we can take a quick snap of that, and then we can close for the evening in the next 3 to 4 minutes. So everyone who wants to put on their camera, can we do that and put on our brilliant smile for the evening? I know it is late, but can we do that for us very, very quickly if you wish? Cameras, turning on, cameras. All right, I think, is that all the cameras we're gonna get? Is that, okay, all right, that's fine. 1, 2, 3, can we smile? All right, I think we got that. Thank you very much for joining us. Join us tomorrow again for SDG 9 and 11 on Kev's Politics. I'm sure it will be an equally as electrifying discussion, and I'm really proud of our showing up today and showing out and remaining with us till the end. Till tomorrow, see you.